He was at the heart of the federal government's response to the H5N1 outbreak in 2008, and in fact came up with the plan to deal with pandemics in the United States that is still being used today. Former Utah Governor and Health and Human Services Secretary Mike Leavitt is uniquely qualified to provide perspective on the current coronavirus pandemic. I sat down with him and asked him 3 questions. How has the inability to screen enough people in the United States for coronavirus hindered the response to this pandemic?
A lot is being made about that. However, I will tell you that it's one of the things that's true about pandemics is that anything you say in advance seems alarmist. Anything, no matter how well or how quickly you've done it, after it starts, is inadequate. And I'm not suggesting that what they did was perfect. It undoubtedly was not. But the fog of war takes over, and things aren't always as perfect as you'd like them to be. Here's an example. FDA has the responsibility to keep the testing accurate. CDC has the mission of getting it done quickly. Sometimes accurate and quick collide.
Yeah.
And in this case, one of the things that happened was that FDA said, we're not sure that's accurate. CDC said, but we've got to get it out quickly. I think in the end, if you were to say to people, what could we have done better? They would say, we should have opened up the testing more quickly, and it would be a better idea if we had a way of being able to keep track of the data. Now, it's unfortunate that that happened, but we're just at the beginning of this process, not at the end. We need data for what's going to happen from this point forward. There's plenty of time to get that right, but they need to get it.
There is a fine line between adequately informing the public and fomenting hysteria. There's a fine line there. How do politicians, health officials, and we in the media walk that fine line without creating more hysteria?
Again, I think we ought to be acknowledging that some quite remarkable things are happening among the American people right now. The closure of businesses, the termination of air travel, the cancellation or suspension of entire schedules, professional and major traditions being set aside for this year to protect the American people and their health. That's a reflection of the fact that the word is out and that people are being informed. Now, are they being informed with the volume up a little too loud? No, you could make that argument, but the reality is lives are going to be saved as a result of the fact that everybody knows now about the coronavirus. If you had gone back 60 days ago, that wouldn't have been the case. If you reflect back on the pandemic of 1918, where 3,500 Utah people died in 4 months, and if you were to use today's population figure, that would be roughly 25,000 people would have died in a comparable situation. One of the things that contributed to that was that they didn't have access to good information. I read today that 92% of the population now understands the threat that the coronavirus poses. That is a civil or civic protection. We're doing good things. We may avoid, as a culture, by doing these things, a tragedy and an economic collapse that could have happened had we not done these things.
Based on everything that you know right now about this pandemic, where do you see it going? How does it ultimately end up?
Well, we'll have some influence on that. If it were left to its own device, we have modeled pandemic viruses for a century and know that there's a sort of slow build-up and then a kind of hockey stick that takes about 6 weeks. And then after 6 weeks, it begins to fall for another 6 weeks. And then it'll go for a while, and sometimes it'll pop back up. The problem with that big hockey stick is that it means that so many people are ill at the same time that it overruns our capacity to respond. So the objective here is to do the things we're doing, closing businesses, closing schools, universities, not holding public events, taking away from the virus the ability to jump from person to person in a geometric way. We hope in doing so then to make that first peak a little lower, and it may be sustained for a little bit longer, but we have the ability to have our health resources respond when a person is really sick. That's why what we're doing is so vital, and I have some optimism that we'll accomplish that. Now, we're going to have a couple of tough months. That's just the way the math is, it's the way the science is, it's the way history tells us this happens. But we'll get through it, and people have some influence on the way it affects them. If we are using this time to prepare, and not necessarily to panic, just do what we're told that will help, the chances of us being affected by this are dramatically lower than if we just do nothing.
Mike Leavitt, former governor of Utah and former Secretary of Health and Human Services, thank you so much for being part of 3 Questions.
To see Bob's complete interview with Governor Mike Leavitt, including whether the public is overreacting and what we still don't know about the novel coronavirus, go to fox13now.com. To hear the full interview in podcast form, just download it wherever you get your podcasts.